Chapter 6. The train to Timber. Squall! Squall, wake up! The excited, frantic knocking on his door had Squall shooting up in bed. His hand was reaching out for his blade even before his eyes were fully opened. The fighting instinct that had been beaten into him for the last decade had him ready even before he knew there was a problem. It was only once he had a foot outside of his bed, raising his revolver, that he recognized Selphie's happy voice. His body kept moving. "It's our first mission, Squall," she continued, yelling delightedly. "We're on it together." Squall was already on his feet, ready to fight as he realized what she was saying. Letting out a breath, he ran his hand over his face. "We're going to Timber," Selphie yelled, oblivious to Squall's reaction beyond his door. "We're meeting by the front gate for our debriefing. Hurry! We leave at 7:30. Squall could hear laughter as she ran off down the hallway. Even as she was running away, he heard the communicator built into his desk beep as he received a message. Probably the instructions for the mission. When he looked at it, his revolver still in hand, he wasn't wrong. Selphie had gotten the message before he had. Even hardwired into the building, communication was still so difficult. He heard stories that it didn't used to be over 20 years ago. Before radio waves stopped working. Probably why someone had sent Selphie to tell him. Whatever. He had gotten the message either way. Sighing, wondering how he had managed to sleep so late, Squall set his blade down on the bed. He ran a hand along the back of his neck as he continued to wake up more slowly. His muscles eased off of readiness and his mind came into focus. 7:30. He had 30 minutes. Squall, when not on assignment, tended to prefer wearing only a pair of loose-fitting, thin fabric pants to sleep in regardless of how cold it was. That was because when he was on assignment, often he was forced to sleep in whatever he was wearing at the time. Either because he had no access to pajamas, or even a bed, or because he didn't want to try to wake up and fight in his underwear. So when he was in garden and there was such a small chance of needing to be awake and fighting in a second, he wanted to wear little and enjoy it. Besides, no one was there to judge him for doing so. Grabbing his clothing from the closet where the garden clones had hung it, despite the fact that he clearly didn't hang up his clothes in his old room, Squall left to take a shower. Not even 10 minutes later, he was back in his room, fully dressed and running a towel through his hair to catch the last of the moisture that clung to the brown locks. He grabbed Shiva's capsule and let her loose into his mind. She took her place eagerly, then hissed in anger because his body was still hot from the heat of the shower. Without her with him, the cold water hadn't been pleasant. Immediately, he felt a rush of cool air over his body, completely negating the effects of the hot water. He was far too used to it for it to bother him. He grabbed his other Odin capsules that held his stocked magic and put them into the belt pouch he used to store them in on extended missions. He packed a few empty ones just in case and locked the pouch onto one of his belts. From a drawer in his desk, why had the clones put them there? He took a few boxes of extra ammo and attached those to his other belt. His revolver's sheath clicked on next and the gun blade was stowed away inside of it. He debated for a moment packing his blade cleaning kit. It was of most importance to ensure that his blade was always in perfect repair. At the same time, he didn't want to take it if it wasn't needed or if it would only weigh him down. After a moment, he grabbed the case. It was compact by design anyway, and he had brought it with him on missions before. That went into an inner pocket in his jacket. Squall turned and walked over to his revolver's case. He wouldn't be taking that with him, however there was something very important, very expensive, in the storage space. It was a space usually reserved for ammo, but Squall never kept it there. Instead, in that spot, Squall kept something that's value was so great and whose construction so difficult that most people would never even get a chance to see one, much less use one. The Inorganic Nanocompressing Vector Enhancing Non-Temporary Optimization Retrieval and Yield Device by Odin Brand Products, or Inventory for short. Shaped like a simple rectangular pencil case, it was designed to be able to hold a vast amount of inorganic material in an impossibly tiny space. Squall's was top of the line and he was promised it would hold 1,800 individual items. That was impossible enough, however it also managed to do so without adding more than a few grams per item to the case. Inside it, Squall had already stored a great many potions and items. He used it now to absorb the rest of his ammunition. Then, because he could, he also absorbed his revolver case. He grinned as he tossed the tiny device up and down. Odin Brand really did make the best in magical goods. He slipped that inside the other inner pocket of his jacket. He was as ready as he was going to get. It was time to start his first seed mission. To first mission of the rest of his life. I am so excited. Selfie was squealing next to Squall at the front gate. The two of them were waiting there with Headmaster Sid and a garden clone. Squall, aren't you excited? She asked, grabbing his arm. Thrilled, he returned dully. His expression didn't dim her happiness. This is the greatest day ever. I mean, really. I think I'm actually going to throw up. Ah! I haven't been this happy since the first time I killed my first snow lion. As Selfie was speaking, she was pulling up her overly large, loose-fitting boots. Since her yellow dress was too short to bend over in, she had to do so by lifting her feet behind her and pulling. She didn't have her waist sheath for her nunchaku today. They were collapsed and stored within those large boots. It was a good way to hide her weapons and really completed the innocent, harmless look that Selfie could no doubt use to her advantage. Squall certainly couldn't pull that off. His blade was too big to hide and wasn't collapsible. He just had to deal with having the sheath at his hip. So he wore black to let people know to stay away from him. If he couldn't hide the fact that he was dangerous, he might as well broadcast it. Squall let the small girl continue rambling on at his side. It didn't bother him overly much, especially considering that she expected little to nothing from him in return conversation. It was enough for her to be able to talk around him. It was the best sort of conversation Squall could ask for besides simple silence. The garden clone waiting with them lifted his arm and looked at his watch. 1 more minute. Zell was late. Of course he was. How was Squall unsurprised that Zell was late? Headmaster Sid didn't appear unhappy. He was rocking back and forth on the balls of his feet, smiling peacefully like they were taking a stroll through a garden. He would look over to Selfie and Squall occasionally, his eyes shining with pride. Headmaster Sid had no children. However, he always seemed to treat his students like they might be his children. Squall wasn't sure if he liked that or not, but it was what it was. He certainly wasn't going to tell the headmaster that he couldn't. The whirring and whooshing of machinery and air alerted them of Zell's approach. Selfie poked her head out from behind Squall to see the blonde rushing towards them on a T-board of all things. His long, baggy shorts flapped in the wind as he raced their way on the illegal contraband. How had he even gotten it in the garden? Letting out a cry of success, Zell zoomed around them in an arc, letting his momentum run out, before stopping before the garden clone. He stepped from the hoverboard. Using one foot, he kicked it up into his hand and grinned at them.
Made it. T-boards are prohibited within garden,
the clone told him, his voice laced with disapproval as Sid smiled good-naturedly behind him.
Have you forgotten?
Oops.
Yeah, sorry.
Zell scratched his head sheepishly like he might have actually forgotten.
But this thing is really cool. It may come in handy on a seed mission someday. We'll be the judges of that.
The clone reached out and jerked the board from Zell's hands.
But, wait. Confiscate it.
The clone held it out. Like he knew it was going to happen, another garden faculty member stepped forward and took the board from his hands. Without even glancing at Zell, he turned and walked away with it. Zell watched him go with a wide-eyed look of horror. Squall didn't blame him. T-boards weren't cheap, nor were they all that easy to get a hold of. He did break the rules though. Squall had no pity for him.
All of you are members of SEED,
the clone told him, his voice firm.
Nevertheless, you are also still residents of this garden. Furthermore, because you are SEED, you must set a good example to all others and abide by the garden's rules. Understand?
Without waiting to see if Zell did understand, the clone turned and nodded to the headmaster. Sid stepped forward, smiling at Zell apologetically but making no effort to call the clone back.
Well then, your first mission. You three are to go to Timber. There, you will be supporting a resistance faction for Timber independence. That is all. A member of the faction will contact you at Timber Station. This person will talk to you and say, the forests of Timber sure have changed,
the clone instructed, his voice low and unmistakable.
At this time, you must reply, but the owls are still around. That is the password. Repeat.
Dutifully, all three of them, even the dejected Zell, repeated the password in unison. The faculty member nodded, satisfied. Sid took over again.
Just follow the faction's orders within the bounds of the contract. That is all that you need to do.
Zell looked around, confused.
Just us three? Correct,
the faculty member nodded. He sounded quite snobby and almost disgusted.
We have agreed to accept this mission for very little money. Hence the reason we're sending 3 rookie-level seeds. Normally, we would never accept such requests, however.
The clone looked over at Headmaster Sid pointedly, but he remained smiling and unaffected.
Enough about that. You three need not worry about the financial side of things. That's my job. So then, Squall, you are the squad leader. Use your best judgment based on the situation at hand to serve the faction and protect your squad. Zell, Selfie, you are to support Squall and give your all to carry out the faction's plans. I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but their goals are yours. You are SEED and the only thing you want is what your client wants,
the clone said coldly.
Just because you have made SEED doesn't mean that title can't be stripped from you if you fail to perform adequately. You'll do fine,
Sid laughed.
Oh, and Squall, I have something for you. Yes, sir.
Squall said as the older man stepped forward. In his hands was what looked like an oil lamp made of black metal and red glass. It was pulsing with a dull, weak light from behind the red glass. There was a wick at the top, pure white and still coated in wax, waiting to be lit.
It is a cursed object,
Sid said, placing it gently in his hands.
I've been holding on to it for a while. What am I to do with it, sir?
Squall asked, turning it over in his grasp.
You don't have to do anything with it at all,
Sid beamed, rocking on his heels again.
In fact, it would be remiss of me if I didn't tell you that using that object could very well kill you. However, if you are strong enough, you may tame the power trapped, sleeping, within that lamp.
Tame?
Is this a GF, sir?
Squall frowned, staring harder now at the lamp.
A very old one, I'm told. Quite resistant to having a master. However, Quistis told me that you're having difficulty finding a GF your Shiva is willing to share with.
The immediate flash of contempt told Squall that Shiva still was. And that wouldn't change no matter what GF was within that bottle, she promised.
If you ever feel like you want to increase your power, try releasing that GF. He will fight you in a realm of darkness, but if you earn his loyalty he will make a great ally. Thank you, sir.
Squall nodded his head. He slipped the lamp into his jacket and pushed the button on his inventory to absorb it.
Off you go now,
Sid beamed.
And good luck to all of you.
The three of them saluted the headmaster before turning and walking from the gates.
Do you want to summon the GF now, Squall?
Selphie asked eagerly.
Yeah, summon it now.
Zell agreed, nodding.
I bet we can take it. No,
Squall said firmly.
I'm not forcing a battle I might not be ready for. We don't need a new GF now anyway. I'll save it for later.
Zell agreed sadly and Selphie pouted, but neither of them argued. Balam was a tiny island nation. It was a power in the world only by virtue of seed. Not only were they too strong for armies to want to fight, but they were a necessity. There were seeds serving in every country. They had made themselves invaluable and therefore no one wanted to risk making them mad and losing their support. So Balam was tiny, but they were considered untouchable. Their only connection to the outside world was the train system that would take them through Timber. From Timber, the train system connected to the rest of the Galbadian continent. They weren't traveling far for this mission. The three of them walked through Balam. Squall stopped for only a few minutes and placed an order at the junk shop. He was promised his order would be ready soon and he could pick it up the next time he went through Balam. Squall then used his first seed paycheck to buy their train tickets and carried them himself. The waiting locomotive was already ready to go. The conductor welcomed them aboard in the last car. The car that was technically free to ride.
Wow!
Selphie breathed, coming inside.
This train is awesome. So much prettier than the one I took down from Trabia. An intercontinental railroad, baby!
Zell yelled proudly like he might have been the one to have built it.
It runs through an underwater tunnel to get to Timber. There's lights along the way too, so you get to see some pretty sweet sights. Pretty cool, hey?
He looked at Squall, his eyes beaming.
Sure is,
Squall said dully, nodding along without caring. Zell deflated.
Guess you're not interested.
Selphie was ignoring them. She had walked over to the door that led to the train proper. From here, you couldn't see outside or even sit anywhere but the floor. She shifted between her feet, staring at the door pointedly like she expected it to magically open.
You have to use the tickets to get inside, Squall,
Zell said, pointing. He was nothing if not obliging. He walked over to the ticket taker and let it scan their tickets. It beeped, a light going across the passes.
Confirming,
it said in a robotically female voice.
Access granted. Tee-hee.
Selfie laughed in delight as the door slid open.
Thanks. I'm gonna go check out the front. I want to see the underwater tunnel.
She ran through ahead of them.
Shall we, Squall?
Zell asked, grinning.
I want to see the cabin.
Squall let him go first. He followed after him to see Selfie standing in front of the large window on the side aisle of the train. Though there would be windows in their private car, the ones out here were wider and offered a greater view as the train moved along. It jerked gently as it pulled from the station and started out from Balam. Selfie laughed loudly in delight because the train almost immediately went down into the underwater tunnel. Lights lit up as it passed, showing a marvelous view of the ocean as it drove by.
Yo, check it out.
Zell stopped before the first door.
Seed's private cabin.
He pointed at it with his thumb. It was locked, access only allowed to verified Seed IDs. Seed IDs being, usually, something that wasn't obviously an ID. There was no point broadcasting what they were. Zell's ID was a tiny microchip at the front of his wrist, under his glove. He waved it over the scanner and it beeped before sliding open to let him in.
Whoa!
Zell took a step back to regard the room in awe. Then he ran in. The door slid shut again, but it didn't stop Squall from hearing Zell yell,
"OHH yeah HH! Awesome!"
As Squall passed Selfie, she was singing something under her breath. It sounded like a song about trains. He didn't really want to know. Squall lifted his hands and grabbed hold of the lion necklace around his neck. He turned the pendant towards the scanner, and the microchip hidden under the outer coating of metal caused the scanner to beep before allowing him entrance as well. Squall stepped into Seed's private cabin to find Zell giggling, bouncing up and down on the fine leather couch in the large room.
"This is so cool,"
he said, running his hand over the leather.
"Ah! So soft."
Squall let his eyes travel around the cabin. There were 2 beds and, just from looking, he could imagine that the couch could unfold into a third. Given the size, he wouldn't be surprised if it could actually make 2 more. Everything was made of the finest materials. The scent was of leather and wood and cotton flowers. Squall looked back towards Zell to see him practically purring on the couch.
"I'm glad you're so excited,"
he said, deadpan.
"The magazines kind of suck, but who would even read in here? There's a TV behind that panel right there. This is pretty damn amazing. It pays to be a member of Seed."
Seed was the best. They gave the best at all times. In return, they were given the best. They got private rooms, access to the private cabins, and privileges others did not. It was Headmaster Sid's belief that if Seed gave it their all, they would get only the finest luxuries in return. Squall walked across the room, the carpet was like a cloud under his boots, and took a seat on the other end of the L-shaped couch.
"Hey, Squall, you know anything about timber?"
Zell asked, grinning. As a matter of fact, he didn't. He didn't really care to involve himself in politics or other such matters in other countries. He barely kept track of things in Balam. However, if he was going to be working for a resistance, it would behoove him to learn.
"Not too much,"
he admitted.
"Thought so,"
Zell nodded, a very sagely look coming over his face.
"You've come to the right place. Let me fill you in. Timber used to be a country surrounded by deep forests. But 18 years ago, Galbadia invaded. Timber was a peaceful country, they fell easily to Galbadia's superior technology because of their old trade agreement with Esther. So now Timber is under Galbadian occupation. Galbadia claims they're now a territory of Galbadia, but Timber doesn't agree. It's said there's a whole bunch of resistance factions all over Timber.
Zell fell silent and Squall looked up at him.
End. Nope, that's it,
Zell grinned, proud of himself. Squall blinked at him. After all that, he kind of expected a lot more. Zell just continued to smile at him, oblivious to his inner thoughts. Well, it was more than he knew a moment ago. Squall looked away from him.
Thank you, Mr. Know-It-All Zell. Hey, no prob, Captain. Don't call me that. Why not? You don't like it? You called Cypher Captain. That was a military situation on an active battlefield. We're trying to remain undercover. My name is fine.
Honestly, he didn't like the title, but he had a legitimate excuse not to be called Captain. He grasped onto it gratefully. Zell was grinning at him when the door beeped gently. It slid open and Selphie walked inside. She was rubbing her eye with one hand, taking the other back from the scanner from where she had let it read the microchip in her wristband.
I'm not.
She swayed a bit on her feet, her eyes fluttering.
Feeling well.
Squall frowned and stood up to look at her. Had that seemingly inexhaustible well of energy she drew from finally run out?
You should get some rest if you're tired.
She said nothing, still rubbing her eyes, swaying in place.
I'm really sleepy.
Squall stepped towards her, concerned now.
You okay? Selphie, what's her?
Zell, who had been standing up, stopped in place and grabbed for his head as he started swaying too. Squall's head darted over to him as alarm bells sounded in his head.
What they?
Zell's eyes fluttered like he was having trouble keeping them open.
Something's wrong with me, too. I feel sleepy.
Zell dropped back onto the couch, his head falling backwards. Selphie staggered over and collapsed into a tiny ball right beside him. Both of them fell asleep just like that.
What's going on?
Squall stepped back, his eyes looking around for some sort of attack. A painful, terribly high-pitched whistle started in his head. Building. Growing louder. Squall cried out and grabbed for his forehead. He heard Shiva yell out in surprise. Then her voice faded away, alarming him further.
What is this?
He ground out through his teeth. His vision started graying and he felt his body rock as his knees hit the ground. The sound reached a new pitch and he cried out again. His vision went black as his body fell forward. He slammed into the ground. Shiva's voice was completely silent. End of chapter.